Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. Guys, can you all hear me? Is my voice clear for you all? Am I audible? Can I get a quick reply from everyone? So, guys, shall we start the class then? Okay, guys, then good evening, everyone, and welcome to my history class. So, before we begin, okay, so I want you to think about one simple question. Okay, so what is the question? The question is, what is history? You all might think, what is history? Yeah, any replies? What is the meaning of history? First of all, I need the answers from y'all. Yeah, what is history? So before studying it, yeah, we need to know what is history, right? So we can move on to it. Yeah, yeah, I'm getting more the answers. Yeah, learning about the past. Yeah, studying about ancient. Yeah, good. Okay, very good. So you all know what is history, right? Okay, guys. Now many students think history is just about what? Memorizing dates, names, and events. You all think. So many students they think like that. But that is not the real meaning of history, right? So, what is history really is? History is the study of past human activities. Yeah, yeah. History means studying about ancient. Yeah, history is the study of past events and how people lived long ago. Yeah, correct. Studying about ancient. Yeah. So history is the study of past human activities, right? So it helps us understand how people lived, what they believed, and how societies developed, and how the world became what it is, what it is today. So everything we learn today, our culture, our system, so our traditions come from the past, right? So, and history helps us understand that connection, right? The role of sources, that means, but how do we know about the past, right? So, we were not there, right? இப்ப முந்தி காலத்துல நடந்ததெல்லாம் you all know உங்களுக்கு தெரியும் because we have to know it. We were not there. இப்ப நாங்க அங்க இருந்தோமா முந்தி காலத்துல the ancient time. We were not there. So that's where sources of history come in. Okay. So these include what? Writings, books, inscriptions, coins, ruins, and many other remains left by people in the past, right? So by studying these sources carefully, the historians build a clear picture, no guys, of past civilization. So in this class, so I will not teach you to just to memorize. Okay. So I will help you understand the concept clearly. We should connect the events like a story and write answers in a way that scores marks in exams also. Okay. No, so shall we start? So I are clear what is history, the role of sources, everything. Okay, guys, now the subtopic is now sources of studying history. Okay, now let's see. So I have given some points you all can see. History studies past human activities, past people left writings and creations. These writings and creations are called sources. Sources provide information about past societies. Logical study of sources helps from history. Okay, so history studies the past human activities, right, guys? Now history is a subject, no? So that help us to learn about what people did in the past, right? So when we say past human activity, so we are talking about how people lived long ago. So what kind of work they did and how they ruled the country and how they built houses, then how they traded goods and how they worshipped and how they solved problems in their daily life. So history does not study animals of nature alone. No, it mainly studies human beings and their actions. So according to this chapter, the first chapter, so history is about studying the lives of people who lived hundreds and thousands of years ago. So these people did not alive today, right? They don't live today, so we cannot ask them questions, no, directly. So that is why history people are not alive today. So we should study it carefully, right, guys? And their actions through the evidence they left behind. For example, guys, now if ancient people built tanks and canals, history studies how and why they did it. So if kings rule countries, history studies how they ruled and what kind of decision they made. So by studying the past human activities, we can understand how society changed over time. So this chapter explains that when guys, wait a minute. Okay, okay, guys. Now this chapter explains that when we logically study information about people's past lives, no, so we can build history. So this means we must think carefully and not guess. So history helps us understand how people face challenges such as wars, droughts, and like governance. So learning about past human activities also help us to understand that today's society, how the society and did not appear suddenly. So it was created step by step by people who lived before us. So therefore history is an important subject, no, that connects us with the human life in the past and help us understand how human society developed over time. Okay, okay, the second point you can see past people left writings and creations. So people who lived in the past did not disappear without what, without anything, that leaving anything behind. According to this chapter now past people left many writings and creations. No, writing include books, not only books, documents, inscription, and records written on different materials such as ola leaves, stones, metal. Creation include buildings, tanks, shape like stupas, coins, tools, and other objects made by humans, right? Okay, now these writings, guys, these writings and creations were not made for us, but they became very useful for studying history later. For example, now kings wrote inscription to record donation to temples and laws and important events also. So ordinary peoples also left creations such as houses, pottery, and tools also. So these creations show how people lived, what technology they use, and what skills they had. So this chapter, it replaces what this chapter explains that when we study the history of many years ago, we find writings, no, writings and various creations made by people who lived in those ages. So without these writings and creation, we would not know no much about the past. Okay, so we cannot see past people directly. இப்ப பாஸ்ட்ல வந்து எங்களுக்கு இப்ப இந்த ஏஷியன் ஆட்களை பார்க்கலுமா, we couldn't see them, right? So they had the knowledge, right? So we cannot see the past people directly, but we can see what they made. For example, guys, now ancient tanks show that people had knowledge about what water management, right? So coin shows that people traded as and used money. No, and writings show what language people use and what ideas they believed in. So therefore, guys, now the writings and creations left by the past people, no, like messages sent from the past activities, and they help us understand human life like long ago and make history possible, right? So the third point you all can see, these writings and creations are called sources. So this chapter clearly explains that the writings and creations, guys, that means left by past people are called sources. Okay, so a source is anything that gives us information. No, a source means what? A source is anything that gives us information about past human activity. So that is called as sources. So when historians study history, they do not imagine, no guys, they do not imagine or guess the events. So they depend on sources. So sources can be written or physical. For example, a book written long ago is a source, and a stone can be written or in physical, like an inscription is also called a source. Okay, so a tank, a statue, or a coin is also what, a source. So these sources help historians collect information about the past. You all got it? Okay, now this chapter it uses the word sources, guys, because they are the origin from which information about history is taken. Just like water comes from a source. Y'all think like that. So information about history comes from historical source. So each sources belongs to a what? A certain time period. And it help us to understand that period better. So some sources tell us about the king and the rulers. No. So while others tell us about the ordinary people, sources are very important, guys. No, because without them, history cannot be studied properly. So in this chapter, I will also explain that there are many types of sources, and later they are uh, classified into literary. Okay, some sources are there, literary sources, the archaeological sources. But at this stage, guys, now y'all must understand that any writing or creation that gives us information, no, about the past is called a source. Okay, now sources are the foundation of history. Y'all think like that. இப்போ ஒரு source தான் history ஓட foundation. And every historical lesson begins with studying sources carefully. Y'all got it? Okay, guys, now what do we call the writings and creation left by the past people? Y'all tell me. Anyone? What do we call the writings and creation left by the past people? What is called as? That means what do we call the writings and creations left by the past people? Yeah, I got the answer. Amla, correct answer. Yeah, the sources. They are called the sources. Okay, very good. Okay, guys, now you can see the fourth point. Sources provide information about past societies. Okay, now sources are important because, guys, so because they provide information about the past societies. A society means, guys, a group of people living together with their own way of life. Okay, so according to this chapter, I'm telling you all now, sources help us understand the social what, the social background of people who lived in different eras. So this include their culture, no? The culture, the religion, the economy, the politics, and the daily life. For example, now an inscription can tell us about laws and taxes, which show how society was governed. So religious books can tell us about beliefs and customs. So ruins such as houses, tanks can tell us what, how people build their environment and manage the resources. So coins can tell us about trade and economic conditions also. Okay. So When we study these sources, we can learn how people dress, what food they ate, and what jobs they did, and how they treated each other. So sources help us compare societies from different period. So we can see how society changed over time. No, guys. So that sources, it belongs to different ages. It gives us a good understanding of those eras and their social what the social backgrounds. So this means, guys, no, sources act like mirrors, no, that shows us the past societies. So without sources, we would not know how people lived before us. So therefore, sources are very useful tools that help us understand the full picture of the past societies. Y'all got it? Okay, now the last point, logical study of sources helps from history. Okay, guys, now the history is formed when information taken from source is studied logically. So this means, guys, now historian must think carefully, no? And like when using sources, they should not blindly believe everything written in a source. So instead, they must check, no, when the source was written and who wrote it and why it was written. So logical study means comparing different sources. Like that, that means checking the facts. Is it true? Idu unme aikuma, like that. We know we need to know the proof and understanding the conflict. So, for example, guys, if one source mentions an event, so historian check other sources to confirm it. So, when information from sources is studied in this careful way, so correct history can be written. So, it clearly states that when information takes from sources is studied logically. So, the history about people's lives in each period is formed. Okay. So, we have to think everything, right? So, therefore, the sources alone are not enough. So, they must be studied properly. The logical process turns raw information into meaningful history, no? So that we might can understand and learn. Okay. Okay, guys, now let's move on to the introduction. Okay, sources are necessary to study history. Sources used in history are diverse. History is built using information from sources. Studying sources helps understand past societies. Learning history help understand social background. Okay, guys, now imagine now you want to know what happened in your school last year. Can you imagine? Last year school என்ன நடந்துச்சு? You all can remember. But you were not studying that at that time. Okay. How will you know? You will ask teachers. No. Read the old records. Look at photos. Oh, you all will see the trophies. You all might win in the what sport meet or concert or anything. So, guys, now in the same way, so when we study history, we are studying things, right? Okay, we are studying the things that happened a very long time ago. So we were not alive at that time. So we cannot see those events, right, with our own eyes. So that is why we need sources. You got it? So, guys, now the sources give us the evidence about how people lived in the past, no? What they did and what they believed and how societies developed. So, just like footprints now show that someone walked on the sand, sources shows that people lived and acted in the past life. So, if there were no sources, means what will happen? History would be only stories, no, without proof. So, therefore, sources are the foundation of studying history. I got it. Okay, now the second point, sources used in history are diverse. Now let us understand, guys, that not all sources are the same. So this textbook, it clearly says that the sources used to study history are diverse. No, so this means, guys, now this means there are many different kind of sources. Some sources are written, some as like books, some as document. So some sources are things we can see and touch, such as what, ruins, coins, inscriptions, monuments. We can touch it, right? So people in the past lived in different ways and left behind different kinds of evidence. No, for example, some people wrote books while others built tanks or temples. So all these become sources. No, so the diversity of sources is very important because one type of source alone cannot tell us the full story of the past, right? So when we study many kinds of sources together, we get a clear what yeah, we get a clearly and more accurate understanding of history, right? So that sources belong to different periods and the backgrounds also, so they help us understand different eras. So this diversity help us historians compare the information and learn more about society in the past. Okay. Okay, the third point is history is built using information from sources. That means, so, guys, now history does not appear by itself, no. It explains the history is built using the information provided by sources. So, this means, guys, now historians collect information from sources and study them carefully. So, they read books, examine inscription, study ruins, they read books, no and analyze the coins. So after that they organize the information logically. So when information from sources is studied correctly, history about people's what lives in each period is formed. For example, if we find an inscription about a king giving a land to a temple, we learn about government, right? The government, the religion, and the society of that time. So history is like a building. I'll think like that. And sources are like bricks. So without bricks, guys, a building cannot be made, right? So in the same way, without sources, history cannot be constructed. Okay. So it clearly states that logical study of information taken from sources help from history. So therefore, sources are not just collected, but carefully studied to build a true history. Okay. Okay, the fourth point, studying sources help understand past societies. Okay, guys, now when we study sources, we do not just learn dates or names, no. Now the textbooks also explains that the sources help us to study and understand the past society and their social background, right? That this means, guys, we learn how people live, what jobs they did, what how they rule the country. We might think, right? And how they practice religion. For example, like ruins of tanks show how ancient people managed water. So books shows their beliefs and ideas. That coin shows the trade and economy. So by studying the sources, we understand their daily life, the culture, the technology of the past. So this help us see how societies change over time. So it says the sources belonging to different ages. It gives what as a good understanding about those eras. So studying the sources is like opening a window to the past and looking at how people lived long ago. Okay. So the fifth point is learning history help understand the social background. So finally, guys, now the learning history help us understand the social background. Okay. Now the social background means, guys, how people live together and how society was organized, right? And what values people follow. So by learning history through sources, we understand why society is the way it is today. So we learn how our ancestors face problems and solve them. So this help us understand our identity and culture. Okay. So the history is not just about the past, but also about understanding human life also. So when we know it, uh, okay, guys. Now, when we know about the social background, we respect the culture. The culture, not only the culture, the tradition, the development of society. So therefore, guys, now learning history uses sources to help us students to understand the society better and become responsible what citizens. Okay. Okay, guys, now let's move on to the classification of sources. Okay, so the first point, sources are divided into two main categories. Okay, literary sources are written records, archaeological sources are physical remains. Each source type belongs to different historical periods. Both source types help us understand the past civilization. So the first point is sources are divided into two main categories. So how many categories are divided? The sources. There are two main categories. So let's see what are they. So guys, now when we study history, so we cannot just guess what happened in the past. We need a proof, right? So that proof comes from things left behind by people who lived long ago. So these helpful things are called sources. So because there are many kind of sources, historians have divided them into two main categories. Okay. So there are only two main categories of sources. Okay. Okay, guys, now this help us to study history in a clear and organized way, right? When things are classified, it becomes easier to understand it. Just like when you keep books, your clothes, or your toys in a separate place at home. So, according to this, guys, now all sources used to study history are divided into two main categories. So these two categories, okay, categories are called what? Literary sources and archaeological sources. So every sources we use will belong to one of these two groups. Okay. So this division is very important because different sources give different types of information, right? So some sources tell us stories using words while others show us information through objects and remains. For example, guys, now if you find a very old what a written book, I'm telling you, for example, an old book like written many years ago, it will belong to one category. So if you find an old coin or a stone inscription, it belongs to another category. So by dividing the sources into two main categories, so historians can carefully study the past in a systematic manner. Okay, so this help them avoid the confusion and the mistakes. Okay, so it clearly the history explains that without this classification, like it would be very difficult to study history properly, right? So remember, guys, the first and most important step in studying sources is understanding that there are two main categories of sources used in history. Okay. Okay, the second part is literary sources of written record. The second point. Okay, guys, now let us learn about first category called the literary sources. So, what is mean by literary sources? Now, let's see. Okay, guys, now the literary sources are sources that are written, right? So, this means they include words, sentences, and writings made by people in the past. So, according to this, guys, now, according to this, now literary sources include what? Books and documents written at different time period by people who lived in the past. So, this writing help us understand what happened long ago, right? So, literary sources can be written on different materials in ancient Sri Lanka. So, many literary sources are that are written. This means they include words, sentences, writings made by people in the past, and literary sources include books and documents written at different types period people who lived in the past. Okay, so these writing help us understand what happened long ago. Okay, so literary sources can be written on different materials. So in ancient Sri Lanka, many literary sources were written on, but in all leaves. So these writings, guys, now these writings were carefully prepared and preserved. So literary sources tell us about events, some kings, wars, religion, and daily life also. So, for example, so texts like what Deepavamsa, Mahavamsa are literary sources, no, because they were written to record historical events. So, guys, now these sources are very useful for us. So, they reminds us that we must use them carefully. Some literary sources were written many years after the actual events happened, and sometimes writers repeated information or wrote based on their own options. So, because of this, historian must think carefully when using literary sources, right? So even though there are some limitations, guys, now literary sources are very important, no? Because they give what? They give us detailed description of the past. And without written records, we would not know the name of the king, right? So the order of event and how the people live. So literary sources are written records that play a very important role in studying history. Okay. Okay, the third point, the archaeological sources are physical remain. Okay. So now we move to the second category, which is archaeological sources. No, guys. Now the archaeological sources are not written using words. So instead, they are physical. What remains? No, guys. Now left behind by ancient people. So archaeological sources include what? The relics, the monuments, coins, inscription, ruins, and drawings, sculptures, and antiquities. And these sources are found through the archaeological excavation and the experiment. Okay, so this means the archaeologists carefully dig the ground to discover objects used by people. No, okay. Now, for example, now guys, so when coins, stone, inscription, or ancient buildings are found, they are considered in archaeological sources. So, archaeological sources are very important, no? Because they give us information that is not written in books. Sometimes literary sources may not mention certain details, right? So, but archaeological sources can show us how people built houses, how they managed water, what tools they used, right? And and what materials they valued. Okay. So another important point from this is the archaeological sources are most contemporary sources. That means, so this means, guys, they were created during the same time period as the events. So because of this, they are often very reliable. So an inscription written during a king's region, it gives direct evidence about that time. So the archaeological sources are physical remains that help us understand the real life of ancient people. So they help historians confirm and support information found in literary sources. Okay. Okay, the fourth point, each source type belongs to different historical period. Okay. Now guys, now this point teaches us that sources come from different time periods. That means so sources were created in different ages of history. No? Some sources belong to a very ancient period and while others belong to more recent period. So because of this, each source reflects the time in which it was created, right? For example, some literary sources were written about 2000 years ago, while others were written a few hundred years back. So, similarly, the archaeological sources, such as what Brahmi inscription, belong to a very early period, while other inscription like belong to later periods like the Kandyan kingdom. So, we have to understanding the time period of a source is very important, right? So it explains the historian must pay attention to what when the source was created, no, who created it and why it was created. So a source written long after an event may contain mistakes, no, while a source created during the event may be more accurate. So, guys, now the historical period of a source. Now, the historians can place events in the correct order. So this help us creating a correct historian timeline. No, so each source type belongs to a specific historical period, and knowing this help us understand the history clearly. Okay. Okay. The last point. Both source types help understand the past civilization. Okay, guys, now finally let us understand why both literary sources and archaeological sources are important. So, it explained that the both sources types help us to understand the past civilization, right? So, we cannot depend on only one type of source to study history properly, right? So, literary source, no, one is literary source. It gives us written description of events, ruins, and societies. So, archaeological sources give us the physical proof of how people actually live. When history like study both together, they get a complete balanced understanding of the past. Okay, guys. Now the archaeological sources also help fill gaps in literary sources. So sometimes books do not mention the certain things, no, but the ruins or objects can give new information. So therefore, both type of sources are needed to build an accurate history, right? So, guys, now remember, history is not to build using only books or only objects. Okay, it is built by carefully studying both literary sources and archaeological sources together. Okay. Okay, guys, now the literary sources. Okay, literary sources are books and documents written by people who lived in the past, written in different historical period, provide political, social, and religious information used to study Sri Lankan history. Okay, guys, now the first point, literary sources are books and documents. Okay, guys. Now let us carefully understand what literary source mean. Okay. So literary sources are what, guys? Now books and documents, right? That were written by people in the past. Okay. So these are not modern books that we read today for fun. Okay. So these are writings, guys, created long ago by people who lived in different eras, the historical period. So when people lived in the past wanted to record important events, so religious activities, like royal stories or daily life, so they used writing as their method. So they wrote these records on materials such as old leaves, paper, copper plate, so stone slabs. So these written materials have survived until today. It helps us to learn about history. Okay, guys. Now, in history, we cannot see the past even no with our own eyes. Can we see? So we were not alive no during those times. So we depend on written records to know what happened. So, books and documents act like a bridge between the past and the present. For example, if a king, I'm telling, if a king built a tank or a temple, okay, so the people of that time wrote it down, so that writing becomes a literary source. You all got it? So, without such books and documents, we would not know the name of king, no, the years they ruled, or the important events of their time. So these books and documents include many forms such as the chronicles, the poems, the religious texts, travel records, and the official writings, and all of them belong to literary sources. Why? Because they are written records, right? So even a small document like a letter or a royal orders or important because they give information about the society, the economy, the culture of the past. So therefore, literary sources are very valuable to study history. So because they preserve human experiences in written form. So think of it like this, guys. Now, if you write a diary today and someone reads it after like 500 years, after 500 years, you'll think they can understand, right, how children lived in your time. In the same way, now books and documents written long ago help us understand how people lived in ancient Sri Lanka. Okay. So the second point, written by people who lived in the past. Okay. Now let us move to the second point. Okay. Literary sources were written by people who lived in the past. So this is very important to understand because these writings were not created by modern historians. They were written by monks, kings, poets, officers, travelers, and scholars who actually lived during a close time of events they described, right? So because they lived in those days, now those periods, they had direct knowledge or learned what they had a direct knowledge, no guys, or learned information from people who witnessed those events. For example, guys, now a Buddhist monk wrote many historical texts because the monasteries were learning centers in the past. Now, kings also ordered what records to be written to show their achievement. So, some people wrote poem, what praising kings, while others wrote religious books like explaining belief and tradition. So, all these writers lived in the past and recorded the information, right, according to their knowledge and experiences. So, this is why literary sources are very useful. Okay, so the writers describe things such as wars, temple, construction, donation, trade, and daily life. So they tell us what people ate and how they dress, how they ruled the country, and how the society was organized. So, since these writers lived in the past, their writings reflect the conditions of their time. Okay, so, however, we also must remember that these writers were human beings. So they had their own ideas, right? Like likes and dislikes. So some may have praised kings too much, and while others may have ignored certain facts. So that is why historians must carefully study literary sources. Still, these writings were extremely valuable, no, because they come from people who live close to the historical events. And like your grandparents can tell us stories about your childhood, like people in the past wrote stories about them, right? So these written stories became literary sources that help us learn history today. Okay. Okay, the third point is written in different historical periods. Right? So the third point tells us that literary sources were written in different historical periods. So this means, guys, that books and documents were created at various time in history. Not all at once. Some were written and very early, while others were written many centuries later. So because of this, now each literary sources reflects the time period in which it was written. Okay. For example, books written during the Anuradhapura period like describe the king's religion and the society of that time. So books written during the Palnaruo-Kandyan period, it talk about events and conditions of those eras. As time changed, guys, now the topics, language, and the writing style also changed. Okay. So this helped the historian understand how Sri Lankan society developed over time. So when a book is written long after an event happened, the writer may rely on earlier source, no, or a oral story. So this can sometimes cause mistakes or repetitions. So that is why the time period of writing is very important. So, guys, now historians must check, right, when the source was written and which period it described. Okay. So, for example, guys, now the Deepavams and Mahavams are written centuries ago, but they describe events that happened even earlier, right? So, even though they were written later, they still provide valuable information. So, however, historians compare them with the other sources to make sure the information is correct. So literary sources written in different historical period and it help us how the history was recorded step by step over time and they also show how people's thinking, language and it changed the across centuries. Okay. Okay, provide political, social and religious information. The fourth point. Okay. Okay, guys, now let us understand what kind of information literary sources give us. Okay, literary sources provide political, social, and religious information. So, this means they tell us how the country was ruled, how people lived, and what religious beliefs they followed. Okay, so political information includes detail about what kings, queens, wars, laws, and administration, government. For example, guys, now literary sources describe how kings ruled the country, right? How they collected taxes and how they protected the land. So the social information tell us about the people's daily life, right? So family system, occupation, traditions, and everything. So we learn how people dressed, no, at that time, dressed, what jobs they did, and how the society was organized. So religious information is also very important. So many literary sources were written by Buddhist monks. So they recorded the history of the Buddhist order, temple constructions, and religious practices. So through these writing, guys, we understand how religion influenced people lives and decisions. So without literary sources, we would not know how ancient societies functioned, right? Archaeology sources show physical remains, but literary sources explain the meaning behind these remains. So together, they help us understand history more clearly. Okay. Okay, the last point, used to study Sri Lankan history. Okay, guys, final literary sources are used to study Sri Lankan history, right? Sri Lanka has a long and rich history, and literary sources play a major role in it understanding it. So these sources help historians learn about the ancient kingdoms, rulers, religious development, and foreign relationship and culture traditions of Sri Lanka, right? And local literary sources written by Sri Lankans explain the country's internal history, right? While foreign literary sources gives information about Sri Lankan, what Sri Lanka from an outside view. By using both types, now historians can get a balanced understanding of the past. So literary sources help arrange historical events in order and explain why certain changes happen. So, however, guys, now historians do not use what they do not use the literary sources blindly. They carefully examine the author, the time of writing, the purpose of the book, and then they compare literary information with archaeological sources to confirm accuracy. So, this careful study helped construct the reliable Sri Lankan history. So, without history sources, so Sri Lanka's past would be incomplete, right? So these written records preserve the memory of the nation and help students like you understand where your country came from. Okay. Okay, guys. Now let's move on to the local literary sources. Okay, so some points you all can see. I have given so many points. Okay, written by Sri Lankan in prose and poetry. So, guys, now local literary sources are books and writings that were created what by Sri Lankan themselves, right? So these were written a long time ago. People who lived in Sri Lanka and wanted to record important events like ideas, belief of their time. So these writings were created using prose or poetry. Okay. Now prose means normal writing in sentences. Okay. That is called as prose. Okay. So prose means what? A normal writing in sentence, just like stories, explanation, and poetry means writing that uses like rhythm, special language, and sometimes verses to explain ideas or events. So in ancient Sri Lanka, so people did not have printing machines or computers, right? So they wrote what carefully by what? Carefully by hand, right? So often on Ola leaves and preserve their writing with their great effort. So these local literary sources are very valuable because they show how Sri Lankans thought, what they lived and how they lived and understood the world. They include the information about the king also, the society, the religion, the culture, and what inside view of Sri Lankan history rather than outside opinion, right? Okay. The second one is oldest text is Deepavamsa 4th century AD. So among all the local literary sources in Sri Lanka, guys, the Deepavamsa is considered the oldest text. Okay, are you clear with that? So Deepavamsa was written around 4th century AD. So you all must remember the centuries, the names and everything. Okay, so this means it was written more than like 1600 years ago. Okay, so Deepavamsa is very important, guys, because it is one of the earliest attempt by Sri Lanka to record their own history in written form. Okay, Okay, now guys, now at that time, now writing will not be easy, right? People had to be carefully prepare the Ola leaves. So writing using what tools and what protect to the writing from the damages. So Deepavamsa was written mainly to record historical information, right? And the history of the Buddhist order, also called the Sasana in Sri Lanka. So even though it is very old, okay, it is very old only, but historians still use Deepavamsa to learn about early Sri Lankan history. So however, we explained that because it was written long time ago. Okay, so some events are recorded briefly and some detailed are repeated. Still, its value is very high because it gives us early historical knowledge directly from ancient time. Okay. Okay, the third point, Deepavamsa covers history up to King Mahasen. Okay, guys, now Deepavamsa does not tell us the entire history of Sri Lanka, right? But it covers an important period. According to this, now Deepavamsa include historical information of Sri Lanka up to the end of King Mahasena's ruling period. So King Mahasen was a what he was an important ruler in Sri Lankan history. So Deepavamsa records events related to kings like important changes in the country and especially the development of Buddhist order in Sri Lanka. So this means the Deepavamsa help us understand how religion, the kingship, and society were connected during that time. Okay. So however, some historical events are written very briefly, and some information is repeated. And because of this, the historian felt the need to write another text with fewer mistakes. So even with this limitation, guys, now Deepavamsa is still very useful because it preserved the early historical knowledge, no, that might otherwise have been lost. Right? So it helps us understand how history was first recorded in Sri Lanka and why later writers tried to improve historical writing. Okay. Okay, guys, now up to which king's ruling period does Deepavamsa record history? So, Deepavamsa record history up to the end of King Mahasena's ruling period. Okay, you all should remember it. Okay, the fourth point, Mahavamsa written later with fewer mistakes. Okay, so because guys, now because Deepavamsa had some repeated information and brief record, right? So another important text called Mahavamsa was written later. So the Mahavamsa was composed as a historical chronicle with fewer mistakes compared as Deepavamsa. So the first part of Mahavamsa was written by Bhikkhu Mahanam, who lived in Diksandoya. Okay, Diksanda Seniviya Pirivan. So, like Deepavamsa, Mahavamsa also records the history of Sri Lanka from the arrival of Lord Buddha to Sri Lanka. Okay. Okay, the fifth point, Mahavamsa written continuously over centuries. So, one special feature of Mahavamsa is that it was a written continuously over a long period of time. So after Bhikkhu Mahanama wrote the first part, the other writers added new parts by including information about their own time period. So this means Mahamsa was not written at all once, right? It was extended over centuries as history continued. So because of this, the history of Sri Lanka has been recorded as one continuous story in a single text. So, guys, now in this chapter, it explained that only a few countries in the world have such continuous historical record. So, therefore, Sri Lanka can be proud of Mahavamsa. Okay. Okay. Ola leaf manuscripts tradition. Okay. So, guys, in the textbook figure, I have given all the reference figure 1.1 in your textbook. It shows the ancient literary and religious information. So, if you all have the textbook, you all can see the picture. Okay. The religious information written on the Ola leaf. So, The figure it helps us visually understand how local literary sources were recorded in the past. The ola leaves were prepared carefully, dried, and then used to what writings, right? Okay. The seventh point is important note Mahavamsa is supported by inscriptions. Okay. Guys, now in this chapter it clearly states the Mahavamsa is considered a more credible historical source because some events recorded it have been confirmed by inscription and other sources. So this is very important when studying history, right? So inscription are archaeological sources, and when they match information in literary sources, historians can trust the information more. So this means Mahavamsa is not only a story but a carefully studied historical record. Okay. Okay, the eighth point. Okay, the eighth point is, guys, one Sattapakasini explains Mahavamsa. Okay, so several centuries after Mahavamsa was written, an explanation called Mahavamsa Tikava was prepared, right? So it was written to explain difficult part of Mahavamsa, also gives us details. Okay. So it includes the information not found in the other sources. This shows that even historical books and explanation to help readers understand them better. So it helps us historians and we okay correctly interpret the Mahavamsa. It makes leaving history clearer and more accurate. Okay. Okay, types of local literary works. The last one, table reference. In your textbook, you all can see the table reference 1.1. Okay, so a list you all can see. So it includes what the Sadesha Kavya, Prashasti Kavya, Hatana Kavya. So each written for different purposes, guys. Now this table help us to understand the local literary sources. Not all the time. Some were written to send messages, some to praise kings, and some to describe the wars. Okay, so this table help us to classify the literary sources based on their content. By studying this table, now we can how history was recorded in many creative ways. It also helps us to remember the examples easy for examinations. Okay, so guys, now shall we move to the questions then? Are you ready for it? So some quiz questions I'll be giving you all. Okay, so you can send the answers. There is a chat box. So send me the answers privately. Okay, shall we move to the questions then? So we don't have enough time, right? So are you clear up to this, everyone? Can I get some replies? Are you clear with it? Okay, guys, now the first question. Okay, so one by one, send me the answers. That means first one you'll send me. After if it's correct, I'll tell the names, and after that you'll tell the second one. Okay, you'll send me the second answer. Okay, the first question: what does history mainly study? What does history mainly study? A. Future events. B. Present economy. C. Past human activities. D. Natural disasters. So I will give you all like 1 minute. Okay. Soon send me the answers. What does history mainly study? Okay, shall I reveal the answer? Okay, the correct answer is C. Past human activity. So let's see who to, who sorry who told me the correct answer. Okay, Hathi correct. Nashita correct. Sauda Shahida correct. Sara correct. Yeah, Manha. Very good. Correct answers. Okay, the second one. What are sources in history? What are sources in history? A. Stories made by historians. B. Writings and creations of past people. C. Only books. D. Only monuments. What are sources in history? Okay, shall I reveal the answer? So all are easy answers. You all might think they just giving. Yeah, it's very easy questions. So the answers you all can send it soon. I think. Yeah, no need to think for the answers. It is very easy. What are sources in history? Okay, shall I reveal the answer? Okay, B. Writings and creations of past people. So that is the answer. So let's see who told the correct answer. Okay, Sauda correct. Sauda Shahida Hati correct. Aisha Samir correct. Sara correct. Nashita correct. And Manha correct. Yes, correct answers. Okay, very good. Guys, shall we move to the next question then? Okay, the third question. How many main types of historical sources are there? How many main types of historical sources are there? A1, B2, C3, D4. How many main types of historical sources are there? Okay, shall I reveal the correct answer? Okay, the third answer is B2. Let's see who told the correct answers. Yeah, Manha correct, Hati correct, Aisha correct, Sauda correct, Sara correct. Yeah, Nashita correct. Yeah, very good. Okay, fourth question. Which of the following is a literary source? A. Coin, B. Inscription, C. Books, D. Ruins. Which of the following is a literary source? Okay, fourth one, the correct answer is C, book. Okay, let's see who told the correct answers. Aisha correct, Sauda correct, Sara, Nashita, and Manha. Yeah, correct answers. Okay, the fifth question. Archaeological sources mainly consist of A. Stories, B. Written poems, C. Physical remains, D. Oral traditions. Archaeological sources mainly consist of stories, written poems, physical remains, oral traditions. Okay, the correct answer is C. Physical remains. Okay, so let's check who told the correct answer. Yeah, Manha correct answer. Sara correct. Aisha correct. Sauda correct. Nashita, yeah, correct answers. Okay, the sixth question. Which is the oldest Sri Lankan literary text? A. Mahavamsa. B. Deepavamsa. C. Sigiriya text. D. Tripitaka. Which is the oldest Sri Lankan literary text? Okay, the correct answer is sixth one. B. Deepavamsa. Let's see who told the correct answers. Okay, Sauda correct. Aisha correct. Sara correct. Yeah, Manha correct answer. Nashita correct. Okay. Okay. Seventh one, who wrote foreign accounts about Sri Lanka? A. Only kings. B. Only monks. C. Foreign travelers and writers. D. Farmers. Who wrote foreign accounts about Sri Lanka? So, based on what we didn't study, also, I have given some questions, okay, based on the first chapter. Okay, so those questions also there. Okay, the correct answer is seventh one. The correct answer is C. Foreign travelers and writers is the correct answer. So let's check who told the correct answer. Yeah, Manha correct. Yeah, Nashita correct. Sauda correct. Sara, Aisha. Okay. So what about others? Only these members are sending. Okay, eighth question. Which of the following is a foreign traveler? A. Mahasen, B. Fasen, C. Mahindatero, and D. Dutugemunu. Which of the following is a foreign traveler? Okay, the correct answer is okay. B Fossain is the correct answer. Let's see. Okay, Manha correct. Sauda correct answer. Aisha correct. Sara correct. Okay. Okay. What is the study of inscription called? Ninth one. A. Numismatics. B. Epigraphy. C. Archaeology. D. Anthropology. What is the study of inscription called? Guys, nicely think the question. What is the study of inscriptions called? A. Numismatics. B. Epigraphy. C. Archaeology. D. Anthropology. Okay, the correct answer is ninth one. B. Epigraphy is the correct answer. So let's check who told the correct answer. Yeah, Manha correct. And Amla correct. Aisha correct. Sauda Shahida correct. Nashita, yeah, correct answer. Very good. Okay, tenth one. Brahmi inscriptions belong to which period? A. Modern era. B. Colonial period. C. Second century BC onwards. D. 20th century. Brahmi inscription belong to which period? Okay, shall I reveal the answers? Everyone, soon send me. Okay, the tenth answer is C. Second century BC onwards. Okay, let's check who told the correct answer. Yeah, Aisha Samir correct. Nashita correct. Sauda correct. Yeah, Sara correct. Yeah, correct answers. Okay, 11th question. What is the study of coins called? A. Epigraphy. B. Numismatics. C. Cartography. D. Palography. What is the study of coins called? Okay, the correct answer is B. Numismatics. So I'll check the answers. Yeah, Manha correct. Aisha Samir correct. Amla correct. Sauda correct. Sara, very good. Okay, the 12th one. What were the oldest coins in Sri Lanka called? A. Roman coins. B. Swastika coins. C. Kahapahana. D. Lakshmi coins. What were the oldest coins in Sri Lanka called? Okay, 12th one, the answer is C. Kahapahana is the correct answer. Yeah, Manha correct. Sauda correct. Amla correct. Okay, 13th question. Ancient ruins help us understand A. Only religion, B. Only politics, C. Lifestyle and technology, D. Only wars. Ancient ruins help us understand only religion, only politics, lifestyle and technology, only wars. Okay, the 13th correct answer is C. Lifestyle and technology. Okay, let's check. Yeah, Manha correct. Nashita correct. Aisha correct. Sauda correct. Amla, yes, correct answer. Okay, 14th question. Why are archaeological sources important? They replace books, they verify literary sources, they are easier to study, they are modern. Why are archaeological sources important? So the correct answer is okay. B. They verify literary sources is the answer. Okay, Aisha correct. Sauda correct. Amla correct. Okay, the last question, guys. Okay, 15th question, the last one. Damaging antiquities is encouraged, optional, punishable by law, and ignored. The last question. Yeah, 15th one. Yeah, the answer is punishable by law. The last question. Let's see who told the correct answer. Yeah, Aisha, Sauda, Amla. Yeah, correct answers. Very good. Okay, guys, now it's time to end up the session. So, how was the class today? So, everything fine, right? You all got it, everyone? Are you clear? You all understood very well? Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Okay. Okay. Let's meet, inshallah, for our next class. Yeah. Thank you.